When one of Jehovah's Witnesses wakes up to the truth about the organization and leaves, they generally follow one of three paths. Sadly, in my experience, the majority lose their faith in God and become atheist, agnostic, or simply apathetic to anything relating to spirituality. A smaller number find it hard to worship God without some religious structure to fall back on, so they join one of the other churches of Christendom, willingly accepting their false teachings such as the Trinity. But for that small but precious few who are willing to leave religion so that they can worship in spirit and truth, there is both joy and freedom. Still, they have to grapple with years, even decades, of indoctrination and manipulation. It can be a real challenge to overcome strongly entrenched teachings, such as the belief that only a chosen few, numbering 144,000, are allowed to partake of the emblems, and that partaking must be done only once a year. I remember how nervous I was the first time I partook of the bread and wine. I knew it was a provision Christ made for all his followers, not just a chosen few, but the power of a lifetime of indoctrination still caused me to second-guess myself, despite clear scriptural evidence to the contrary. While the provision to partake is plainly stated in Scripture, what is less clear is when to partake. That is the question we will be answering today. How often did the first-century Christians observe the Lord's evening meal? The governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses claims that first-century Christians held only an annual commemoration of the Lord's Supper. But they have been wrong about so many things that we cannot trust them about this. We have to check things out for ourselves. In the New Testament, or as witnesses call it, the Christian Greek scriptures, it appears that the Lord's Supper is consistently associated with the regular meetings of the ecclesia, the congregation. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, "When you come together, you eat the Lord's Supper," 1 Corinthians 11:20. He does not describe an annual observance, but something that took place whenever the congregation assembled. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Acts 2:42 NIV. They did not devote themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, and to prayer only once a year, but regularly, likewise with the breaking of bread. On the first day of the week, we came together to break bread. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, kept on talking until midnight. Acts 27 NIV. The first day of the week would be what we call Sunday, the day after the Sabbath. The natural reading is that breaking bread in remembrance of Christ was a normal feature of Christian worship. An additional line of evidence comes from Paul's instructions regarding congregational discipline. In 1 Corinthians 5, he commands the congregation to expel the man who was living with his father's wife. In verse 13, he writes, "Remove the wicked man from among you." The verb translated remove is the Greek exjw, meaning to remove, to take away, or to expel. Paul was not merely telling the congregation to stop socializing with the man, he was directing that he be excluded from the fellowship of the congregation, including participation in its communal worship. If the Lord's Supper was observed only once each year, such an expulsion would have had remarkably little practical effect. The force of Paul's instruction makes much more sense if the believers were regularly gathering to break bread and share the cup, from which the expelled man was now barred until he repented. It is for this reason that the early church developed the practice of excommunication, literally exclusion from communion. The term comes from the Latin excommunicare, meaning to put out of communion. In practice, it meant excluding an unrepentant sinner from the fellowship of the ecclesia, including participation in the bread and the wine. If the Lord's Supper had been observed only once each year, such a penalty would have carried far less practical force than if the congregation celebrated it regularly. The writings of the 2nd century confirm the practice of regular communion. Around AD 155, Justin Martyr described Christians assembling every Sunday, the first day of the week, where the scriptures were read, prayers were offered, and the bread and wine were shared in remembrance of Christ. He says nothing about restricting the Lord's Supper to a single annual observance. Earlier still, the Didache, a sort of congregation instruction manual produced near the end of the 1st century, gives prayers for the Eucharist, without suggesting it was limited to once a year. None of this diminishes the significance of the annual event, the occasion on which Yeshua instituted the meal. But after his resurrection, the Lord's Supper became the regular covenant meal of the Christian congregation. Rather than an annual ceremony, it was the recurring expression of the ecclesia's fellowship with Christ and with one another. As Paul concluded, "For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." 1 Corinthians 11:26. The emphasis is not on once a year, but on as often as believers gather together to remember him.